Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all having the best week. If you're new here, welcome. We talk about true crime cases here on this channel, so if that's something you're interested in, make sure to subscribe and come join us. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a solved case, the case of newlyweds Gail and Rick Brink, who had only been married for 18 months when they were both brutally murdered. This case took place back in 1987, and it actually took over 25 years to solve the case with the help of a new cold case unit, which was set up in the place that the murders took place in Ottawa County. And there are truly so many twists and turns to this case, so let's talk about it. Before we do, I just quickly want to thank today's sponsor, Merge Dragons, which is a free-to-play game and it's available on all devices, so anybody can play it, and you definitely should. It is so good, it's so relaxing. What you guys don't see in these videos is that I actually take a lot of little breaks. I'm always taking a few minutes here and there to play Merge Dragons because I am talking for hours when I film these videos, just hours straight. It's a lot of talking, it's a lot of words, and it's very heavy topics as well, so I always just need to take a moment here and there. And Merge Dragons is great because it's a puzzle game, so you complete puzzles. There are hundreds of levels that you can complete to heal the land, and you get rewards that you can take back to your camp as well. In this game, you can collect over 500 different dragons and you can grow your camp. This is my little camp that I have. It's like a whole little world in your pocket that you can just keep growing and cultivating. It's so cute. It's honestly so much fun, guys. You should definitely check it out, and I will leave the link in my description box for you to download it for free, or you can also scan the QR code to download it for free. But yeah, definitely make sure to check it out. I will leave all of the information in the description box down below, and let's go ahead and get into today's case. So Gail Weingarten was born on the 24th of April in 1965 to parents Wendell and Dorothea Weingarten. She was part of a big family. She was one of 8, and she grew up in Ottawa County in Michigan. And her family wasn't a wealthy family financially, but they were wealthy in love. They were a very loving and close family. But the financial struggles of her family had Gail dreaming from a very young age of the day that she could go and start working herself and save money for herself. And she would tell her older sister Cheryl that she was going to work as hard as she needed to so that she would always have enough money to buy whatever she wanted for herself. When she was a teenager, she got her first job as a waitress, where the wages were low, but she earned great money because she got great tips. She was like super charming, very friendly, very funny. Her sister Cheryl said, quote, "She made good money because she just had a charming personality about her." Gail was described as a cheerful, happy person with a hard work ethic and drive to succeed. She was also a beautiful girl, and so she never had a lack of male attention, which, you know, is not always the best thing because men can be men. But luckily she had her older brother Ryan, who was about 2.5 years older than her. He was very protective over her, and their older sister Cheryl described him as a very manly man, so he was always there to look out for her if she got the wrong kind of attention. When Gail was 18 years old, she met a man named Lars, and they just hit it off right away. They moved in together pretty quickly. They built a house together and they lived together for about a year. And then in 1984, when Gail was 19, she was at work and she met a guy, a 25-year-old guy named Rick Brink. He was a contractor. They met at work, like I said, and it was just love at first sight. Gail was immediately captivated, and Rick literally went home and told his mum on that first day that they met that he had met the woman that he was going to marry. So after they met, you know, it was, like I said, it was love at first sight. So Gail goes home, she tells Lars that it's not going to work out between them. She breaks up with him, and he was far from a perfect guy. Their relationship was far from perfect. Gail knew that he was not the guy that she wanted to marry. He was just missing a lot of qualities that she really valued. And when she broke up with him, she went through and she was going through her drawers and getting all of her stuff so she could take it with her to leave. And he came and he slammed her hand in the drawer, and he also hit her in the face, giving her a black eye. And of course, when her older brother Ryan heard about this, he went to Lars and he got physical with him. He hit him and he said, "Don't you ever touch my sister again." Within days of the breakup, Gail and Rick started dating, and they were just perfect for each other. Rick totally swept her off her feet, spoiling her, giving her whatever she wanted, and they were both so head over heels in love. They were very compatible, both super hardworking, ambitious. They shared the same dreams of working hard and raising a family in a home that they could spend the rest of their lives in. In summer, they went to Rick's family house on Lake Michigan, where he had a boat and he taught Gail to water ski, and everyone who knew them just said they were the perfect couple. They were so in love. Rick's friend Bill Whedon said, quote, "She was liquid sunshine. She just lit up the room. You could tell they were truly in love." About a year after they met, on the 25th of April 1986, so just one day after Gail's 21st birthday, they got married in a small, intimate church wedding with their family and friends in attendance. They held a reception at a lakefront club to celebrate, and they just had so much fun. They had been so excited to get married. They danced all night, and then afterwards they rode off into the sunset for their honeymoon. They went on a cruise and enjoyed the beach and the sunshine before coming back and deciding to settle down and buy a house and start their lives together. Rick's dad Garrett helped them find the perfect house. It was a fixer-upper on 20 acres of land on the outskirts of their hometown of Holland, Michigan, on a street called Ransom Street. And Rick's dad was able to negotiate a really great price because the home, it had actually been foreclosed on when the previous owner hadn't been able to make the payments. So that's why they managed to get it for such a good deal. It also had definitely seen better days, and the previous owner also ripped out like a bunch of stuff from the walls before he had to leave. So it was definitely worse for wear, but Rick was a very good handyman. He worked at a furniture manufacturing company and would actually train carpenters, so they were well equipped for the job of fixing the home up together. Rick's friend Bill also said, quote, "I knew they were going to fix it up. Rick was so handy that of course he'd be fixing it up, and the two of them would have laughed themselves silly while they did it." They moved into the property in October of 1987 and documented their renovations on video. They scrubbed it, painted it, knocked down the walls, refinished the floors, installed cabinets, the whole shebang. And by November, they had been married for about 18 months, and Gail super excitedly told her sister that the next room they planned to renovate was actually going to be a nursery because they were ready to start trying for that next step of their lives, to start a family together and fill their home up with children, this home that they hoped to live in for the rest of their lives. They were both ready to start living the life that they had both always dreamed about, but unfortunately those dreams would never come true. On Saturday the 21st of November in 1987, Rick and Gail went to attend the wedding of one of Rick's high school friends, and they had a great time. You know, Rick had a couple of drinks, Gail got a little bit tipsy. They left at around 11 p.m. to go home, and that was the last time that they would ever be seen alive. 2 days later, on the 23rd of November, neither Gail nor Rick showed up at work. Rick worked at a big furniture manufacturing company called Trenway, and he was a super hardworking guy. He was very reliable, so it was so out of character for him to just not show up, not say anything, and his boss was like, immediately, something is off, something is not right. He tries to call Gail and Rick's home phone to check up on him, but there was no answer. So then he calls Rick's parents, Garrett and Ida, and he's like, "Do you know what's going on? Rick didn't come into work. I can't get a hold of him." And they were also concerned because they know their son. They know this is super out of character for him. So they call Gail's work and, you know, to check in on her, see if she knows where Rick might be, what's going on. And from that call, they find out that Gail also did not show up for work. Gail worked at an office at Donnelly Automotive. And again, like I've said, she was a very hardworking woman. She was very reliable. So it was extremely out of character for her not to show up at work. So Rick's boss and his parents actually decide to go to Gail and Rick's house to check on them, see what's going on. When they get to the house, Rick's Chevrolet Blazer is parked in the driveway. So they're like, okay, great, they're home. You know, maybe they've just fallen sick and they're so sick that they've slept in and haven't managed to call in yet, or maybe they have uncharacteristically decided to take a day off without saying anything. But then when they approach the car, they find that 28-year-old Rick Brink's body is slumped inside. He was on the driver's side of the car and his knees were on the floor of the driver's side under the steering wheel, and his body had slumped over towards the passenger seat, so his head was on the passenger side door. And they also noticed that there was blood coming from gunshot wounds to his head. His parents were absolutely horrified and they didn't enter the house. They were scared of what else they might find inside, and so they called the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. When law enforcement arrived, they entered the house and they walked down the hallway that led to the primary bedroom in the house, which is where they found the body of 22-year-old Gail Brink. At first glance, it looked like she was just sleeping. There was a pillow covering her face, but when the officers removed the pillow, they realized it was stained with blood and she had been shot 3 times in the face at what appeared to be point-blank range, execution style. The officers' first theory immediately was that this was potentially a murder-suicide they were dealing with, that Rick killed Gail and then got in his car to flee, but he felt so guilty that he ended up ending his own life as well. When officers went out to the car to look for the murder weapon, there was no weapon in the car whatsoever, no gun, nothing. So there's no way that he was the murderer. No way this was a murder-suicide. The killer had obviously killed both victims and then taken the murder weapon with them, which was later determined to have been a .22 caliber revolver. Like Gail, Rick had also been shot in the head. He had been shot twice in the left side of the head at point-blank range. There was a bullet hole in the passenger seat window which had smashed the window, and then the driver's side window was partially rolled down, which led investigators to believe that the killer was known to the victims. They theorized that Rick had lowered the window to talk to the killer, meaning he likely knew them and didn't feel threatened by them. It's also common when a killer knows their victims for the killer to place something over the victim's head because they feel guilt and remorse for what they've done. And then to add to that, it was also immediately obvious that this wasn't a robbery. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was out of place throughout the house. Nothing had been ransacked. Everything was pretty tidy aside from a few clothes that were kind of lying on the bedroom floor. There was cash all throughout the house as well, like visibly there was cash. Gail and Rick's wallets were both found on the kitchen counter with cash and credit cards still inside them. Gail's jewelry was found around the house. 2 watches were found in the house. They were both also still wearing their wedding rings. No weapons or shell casings or anything was found throughout the house. The only bullets that were found were the bullets that were still inside the victim. So obviously the killer had gone around and retrieved them and taken the time to clean up after themselves before they left. There was pretty much no usable physical evidence at the crime scene either. No footprints, handprints, fingerprints, hair, clothing, none of that sort of thing. There were 6 fingerprints that were found at the house, 4 of which belonged to the victims, and then there was 2 that one was on the toilet and one was on the phone, and neither of them were a match to anything in any of the police's databases. Due to the decomposition of the bodies, it was determined that they were murdered sometime in the early hours of Sunday, the 22nd of November, so sometime after they left the wedding that they attended on Saturday night. Gail's brother Ryan also said that he had tried to call his sister at home on the Sunday and that there was no answer, which furthered this theory. So without any physical evidence to go on in this case, investigators started by questioning, friends, family, colleagues, people who knew Gail and Rick. And when they spoke to Gail's brother Ryan, he told them about Gail's ex-boyfriend Lars and the physical altercation they got in, the fact that he assaulted Gail, and also said that Lars was still in love with her and was probably jealous that, she had moved on, she was happy, she had gotten married. So of course, police go and speak to Lars and he denied having any involvement whatsoever. He took a polygraph test, which he passed, and he also had an airtight alibi. So they ruled him out as a potential suspect pretty early on. Then about 3 to 4 days later, 3 to 4 days into the investigation, police get another lead when the previous owner of Gail and Rick's house actually comes into the police station and he tells them, hey, I actually think that the killer was looking for me and didn't realize that I don't live at that house anymore. So this guy, the previous owner, is a guy known by the name Shotgun Sid. He was actually part of a motorcycle gang, which in Australia we call a bikie. So he was bikie. And he was a pretty well-known, like notorious bikie who was involved in trafficking drugs from Detroit to Holland, and he dealt in guns as well. He ended up becoming an informant because he didn't agree with drugs being sold to teenagers and sold to kids that were of high school age. So he would work with federal agents to basically inform on people who would do that and sell drugs to people of that age. And obviously, you know, snitches get stitches. So his life was threatened multiple times. He was shot on several occasions. He was actually hit in a drive-by shooting that happened when he was at a bar in Holland. And then on at least 2 occasions, he had to use a gun on people who would come onto his property, the Ransom Street property that Gail and Rick now lived in, and he also believed that people still wanted to kill him. Of course, detectives immediately start looking into this, looking into the Detroit motorcycle gangs, and they couldn't find any evidence that they had any involvement in this sort of thing. But I also feel like bikies would probably cover it up. I don't know. I feel like they wouldn't just be like, yeah, or maybe they would. They would kind of want to brand it. They're like, you fuck with our bikie gang. Sid also made some calls to kind of back up what he was saying. I think he had heard a bunch of rumors that people might have been trying to kill him, and so he went to the police and told them. After he told them, he made some calls to see who might have wanted to kill him and who might have done this, and he couldn't find anything either. So I think he also started to maybe not believe his own theory in the end. He thought that all of the rumors were just talk, and yeah, nobody could find any evidence. Police couldn't find any evidence of this being motorcycle gang related, so this theory was also ruled out. About a month later, another lead arose when on Christmas Eve, there was actually another murder just 800 meters or half a mile away from Rick and Gail's house. It was that of 30-year-old Deborah Wilson, and she actually went to the same high school in the same grade as Rick. Her husband had gone out to a party on Christmas Eve. He came home in the early hours of the morning, and Deborah was gone. She was nowhere to be found. All of the lights in the house were on, and the backsliding door that led into a large field behind their house was also left open. So he called to report her missing, and he also called his dad to have him come over and help him figure out what was going on and look for Deborah. And his dad was actually out in the backfield looking for her, and that is when he found Deborah in the field behind their house, having been stabbed to death. She had been stabbed multiple times and her throat had been slashed. Given the proximity of her murder and the Brink's murders, you know, they were only half a mile, 800 meters away from each other. The fact that they went to the same school, same grade, same age, they had overlapping circles, there was immediate speculation that these murders may have been connected and that the killer was somebody that they both knew. And then as they're looking into the connection between these two cases, they believe that there's another case that happened 10 years earlier in July of 1977 that might also be connected. 20-year-old Deborah Polinsky had been stabbed multiple times in an upstairs bedroom in her house, which happened to be less than 1.5 kilometers or less than a mile from the other 2 murders. So there was a theory that, you know, they were all connected and that police were actually dealing with a serial killer. And Holland was a small town, so everybody was terrified. It basically had the entire town in lockdown out of fear because the killer, you know, if there's a serial killer on the loose, they're still out there. They're such senseless killings. They don't know who could be next. But eventually, you know, investigators found no connection between the 3 cases, and all 3 cases went cold. The files went into a box, into a file room where they sat for the next 2 decades, and friends and family started to lose hope. They started trying to come to terms with the fact that there might never be a resolution. They might never get any sort of closure or find out what happened to their loved ones. And then 24 years later, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department started a new cold case unit in 2009. And this unit consisted of detectives Dave Blakely and Venus Repper, and they were exclusively going to work on solving and getting resolutions for cold cases. They had been working together for about 7 to 8 years by this point, and they were also not from the area. So they were from downstate. They were coming into this with, you know, completely unbiased perspectives. They were coming into this with fresh eyes, so maybe they would be able to pick up on things that were potentially missed at the start of the investigation. Detective Repper said, quote, "Loyalties change, friendships change. People who may have been hiding a secret back then no longer feel the need or have held that secret for so long that they want to get it off their chest." So when this cold case unit first formed in 2009, they started out by looking into the Deborah Wilson and Deborah Polinsky case, but then the suspect in the Deborah Wilson case died and there was a confession in the Deborah Polinsky case. And so they moved on to Gail and Rick's case. They start out by going through all of the case files, like scouring through them, all of the witness statements, alibis, everything. And that's when they notice that there's actually an inconsistency or a discrepancy in the alibi of Gail's brother, Ryan Weingarten. Basically, there was inconsistencies in the alibi that his then girlfriend, now wife, Pam, had given him. So originally they both gave the same alibi. They said that they had gone to the laundromat that night. They didn't have enough change to finish their laundry, so they took it to Pam's friend Roz's house. Then they went home and they were together all night. But then later in a polygraph test, when Pam was asked if she had been with Ryan all night, she actually said no. So detectives, of course, go to re-interview both Pam and Ryan to get to the bottom of the discrepancy. And it's about 2011 at this time. So Pam and Ryan have been married for 23 years by this point. They've had 3 kids together. Pam also had another child from before she met Ryan. And so when she met Ryan, when her and Ryan were together at the time of the murders, she was a single mum and her son was 6 months old. And so they were now, by this point, 2011, a family of 6. So detectives Blakely and Repper go to Ryan and Pam's house to interview them, and Ryan's there because he is a stay-at-home dad and Pam is at work. So it's just Ryan at the moment, and they talk to him, but he really doesn't have a good memory from all that time ago. You know, it was like over 20 years ago that this happened at this point. So detectives really want to talk to Pam, see if she knows anything else, and they organize with Ryan to get Pam to come into the station later. She comes into the station. Ryan also accompanies her. He even wants to come into the interview, and the detectives are like, doesn't work like that. Like, we're just gonna interview Pam. You can wait out here. They take Pam in for her interview and she just kind of gives the same alibi. They went to the laundromat, blah, blah, blah. They were together the whole night, and they really don't get any more information from either of them. They don't get any more clarity on what the discrepancy in the alibi was about. And that was kind of it. That was the whole interview. But detectives were like, they were just certain that there was more to this discrepancy. They were sure that they were hiding something. There was more that they knew. So they really started digging into Pam and Ryan and their lives back in 1987, who they were dating, what they got up to, what they were like. Like, they just wanted to know everything about them from that time period. And that's when they find out that back in 1987, at the time of the murders, Ryan had actually been dating 2 women. So he had been dating Pam. They had, you know, they were fresh, newly dating for a few months. And then he had also been dating a woman named Crystal Beelan, who went by Chris. Chris and Ryan obviously eventually broke up, and it was very amicable. They were still on good terms. They remained good friends after they broke up. Detectives find Chris. They go and talk to her to see what they can find out, and they really don't get any more information. They get ready to leave. They're fully standing up, like about to walk out the door, and Chris says to them, well, actually, there might be something else. And Blakely and Repper like look at each other and they slowly sit back down and they're like, what is it? And that's when Chris tells them, well, Ryan was actually into his sister and he would make these really inappropriate comments about her. She told them that on the week of the murders, like after the murders happened that week, he came to her house and he wanted to drive by Rick and Gail's house, and she was like, immediately no thank you. Like, even the thought of driving by that house or being near that house gives me the heebie-jeebies. So instead they went to a park, and that is where he told her that he and Gail had a sexual relationship, and it started when Gail was 9 and he was 12. He claimed it was a consensual relationship, except the last time that it happened, Gail said no and he forced her, so he raped his sister. I mean, I don't think there was any world in which any of their interactions were consensual. Detective Blakely also did not believe that there was any sort of consensual relationship going on. There was no consent from Gail's side. I mean, there's no way. She was 9 years old. There's no way this man molested his sister. He's a monster. Detective Blakely believes that Gail was a victim of her brother's controlling and manipulative behavior. And this was just highlighted when Chris went on to say that Ryan showed her a photo, like while they were at the park during this whole time, Ryan shows her a photo from a boat ride that he, Gail, and Rick had gone on, and it's a photo of Gail in her bikini, and he starts saying, you know, look how hot she is. It's so weird. And then he goes on to say that he had been like staring at her that whole boat ride, like oogling her because she was so hot, and he was like looking at her lustfully, and that Rick actually noticed him and the way that he was looking at his own sister. So after hearing this, detectives are like, okay, it's gotta be him. Like, he has to have some involvement in this. This is just too weird. But Chris's statement about him being into his sister is not enough to convict him, obviously, of the 2 murders. So they have to keep digging and they have to try and get some sort of evidence. And they go and they question more family and friends, and that is when they start hearing some really weird information. They talk to Ryan's older sister Cheryl, and they find out that before this point they had actually been estranged for the last few years because they had a falling out over some veterans benefits for their mother after their father died in 2006. And after this argument they just didn't talk for years. And then all of a sudden, after Ryan's police interview that he and Pam had recently, where police didn't find out anything, he calls his sister and he's like, you know, we're family. Life's too short. We should talk again. You know, I've forgiven you. I miss you. We should make up. He told her blood is thicker than water. Just, you know, very convenient timing for this little reunion. When detectives tell Cheryl about all of the information that they had gotten from Chris about Ryan molesting Gail, she was speechless. She was in shock. She was like sick to her stomach. She had no idea that this had been going on, and she feels like Gail didn't tell her because Gail knew that Cheryl would go and confront Ryan. She also told detectives that when the funeral was happening for Gail and Rick, that he said some really weird stuff. He said like that he could picture the murder really vividly, and he gave this really vivid picture of somebody walking through the hallway and seeing Gail lying in bed, and just really creepy, vivid picture of a dream he had or a premonition he had of how the murders would have happened. And then he also said, you know, sometimes I wonder if I could have done this, which Cheryl at the time just thought was like his way of processing his shock and his grief on the whole situation. When interviewing other family and friends, they also found out that Ryan apparently offered to sell Gail's waterbed that she had been murdered in to a family friend for a good price. He also apparently went through Gail's personal mail after her death and like found some letters from men, and he took them and burned them because he didn't want the rest of the family to see them, or he didn't want his parents to see them. One of his friends told the police that Ryan had also told them about the fact that he had a sexual relationship with Gail. Another one of Ryan's sisters named Lynn said that apparently Ryan said to her, you know, sometimes I wish I could apologize to Gail because I feel as though I've raped her. And he allegedly also said this to one of his nieces. And then apparently he also spoke with his stepson about his sexual feelings for Gail and told his stepson that sometimes she would say no, so I would force her. Detectives also spoke to his aunt, Nava, and she also had some very interesting information. She said that on the day of the murders, both Ryan and Gail had called her to complain about each other. So Gail had called her to complain about the fact that Ryan owed her money. She had co-signed for his car and had even, you know, made one or more than one of the payments. And then Ryan called her to complain that he thought that Gail thought that she was too good for their family. So basically, their parents had sold their house recently and they were living in an RV with the youngest of their children. And they were parking this RV in the car park of Ryan's apartment building. And then they got some complaints. The city had to come and tell them like, hey, you can't park here. And so they had to leave. And Ryan calls Gail and he's like, look, mum and dad can't park at my place anymore. Can they come park somewhere on your 20 acres of land near a water source, near an electrical source? And Gail said no. You know, she didn't want to be responsible for the younger children getting hurt or whatever because they were still in the middle of their renovations. Nava also said that at Rick and Gail's funeral, Ryan said to her apparently that if Gail and Rick had let their parents park the RV on their property, that they would still be alive. And then he also asked Nava, you know, do you think I would be capable of doing something like this? Obviously, all of this information is extremely creepy, and detectives are like beyond certain that Ryan is their guy, but they don't have the evidence at this point. They need something more, and so they want to talk to Pam again because they're sure Pam knows more than she's letting on. So they set up another interview with Pam and with Ryan, and they both come into the station at the same time in separate cars because Pam had to go to work after. And Pam is like super mild-mannered, she's very meek, she's very quiet, whereas Ryan was very abrasive. He was very controlling. He wanted to sit in on Pam's interview, monitor her. He wanted to just be there to see everything that was going on and hear everything that was being said. Pam's interview was first, and her interview went for 3 hours. It ended up being way longer than they thought it would be because it took a while for her to kind of open up, but she did open up and she did tell them that, yes, the alibi was a lie. She told them that they did go to the laundromat at around 5 to 6 p.m., but they were home no later than 8 p.m. Once they got home, Brian left. She had no idea where he went, and then he came back, they smoked some weed, had sex, and then he left again, and he didn't come back until 9 a.m. the next morning. And she said she had no idea where he was in that time. She didn't ask. She thought that maybe he was just like dealing drugs because he was struggling financially at the time and he was dealing drugs to make ends meet. So that's just what she assumed that he was probably doing. She told the detectives that the reason she lied about the alibi is because, you know, Ryan made her. He insisted over the years she stick to the alibi, and not only that she stick to the alibi, but also that she tell him that she believes the alibi is true. She said that even before they came in for this interview, he reminded her of the alibi, what the alibi was, and to make sure she sticks to it. And although she did finally admit that the alibi was a lie, she didn't admit to anything else. That was the only information she gave, even though detectives were sure she still knew more, and there was obviously more to the story because there's a reason she's lying about this alibi, but they just couldn't get it out of her, and they believed it was because she was just so tightly under Ryan's grip. You know, he was clearly a very controlling and manipulative guy in so many ways, and she supported them. She was the breadwinner. She worked full-time to support their family of 6, and he was a stay-at-home father who homeschooled the kids, even though Pam did not want them to be homeschooled. Ryan was just so controlling, she didn't have a say. Even by the end of this 3-hour interview, Ryan was literally banging on the glass window of the interview room saying to let Pam go, when is it going to be over? Like, this man was crazy. Once he starts going insane and banging on the windows, they let Pam go and they bring him in for his interview, and they tell him, look, Pam has just told us that your alibi was a lie, that she was lying for you, and he just deny. He said either they're lying to him about Pam lying or Pam was lying for some reason. He would not admit that the alibi was a lie. They also confronted him about him molesting his sister. They just kind of asked him, you know, what was your relationship with your sister? And he looks at them and he's like, what do you mean? And Detective Blakely says, you know exactly what I mean. And then there's this awkward silence. And finally he says, you know, we were just 2 kids exploring. It was like doctors and nurses. And that was all he said on that. He wouldn't give any more information, admit to anything else, and then he went home. Over the next few days, he starts calling Detective Blakely and leaving these unhinged voice messages. He left like over 30 voice messages. He was saying he hated them but appreciated it at the same time. They're a necessary evil. He told them to back off. He told them that they had been bullying and threatening and coercing his wife into rescinding her alibi, and the fact that she had rescinded her alibi was a lie because the alibi was true.
Hello, hey, this is Ryan Weingarten. I don't know why I'm calling you again. I guess because I hate you and appreciate you at the same time. I still think you're sons of bitches, but you're a necessary evil. If that's a good way of putting it, you know what I mean? Go find my sister's killer. You're barking up the wrong tree here. I know nothing about it. You know, and digging up dirt from our family history, you know, childhood indiscretions, you know, that's not going to shed any more light on it. So we're done. You're an ass. You really are, both of you, after what you put my wife through.
I mean, this guy was clearly unstable, and detectives Blakely and Repper knew that they had to get him off the streets, but they just needed more evidence. And so in January of 2013, they went to Pam's work to get her to come in for another interview without Ryan. And they say to her, look, we are cold case detectives. This is all we work on. We're not getting new cases. Like, this is not going away. We're not going away. We just want to get to the bottom of this. We just want a resolution, and we want to get closure for the loved ones. So Pam agrees to come in for another interview, no Ryan this time, and this is the interview. This is the interview where she comes clean. She tells them everything. At the start of the interview, she agrees that she has not been threatened, bullied, or coerced any way into coming in or, you know, telling them what she was about to tell them, and then she got stuck in. So she said, you know, they went to the laundromat, he went out, he came back the next day at 9 a.m. She said that at 9 a.m. when he came back, he comes to her house and he just like starts banging on the door, and she's like, what the heck? She goes to the front door, opens the door, Ryan's there, and he's, you know, he's crying, and he just blurts out, I killed Gail and Brink. And Pam is just like in shock. You know, they'd only been together for a short amount of time at this point. She was a single mother to a 6-month-old, and he had been really great to them. You know, he had taken them in. He had been so supportive of her and her son. So she was just like in shock. She asked him if he had told the police. He said no. And he said that he had gone, you know, that night to Rick and Gail's house to talk to them about family matters. And those family matters were likely the RV parking situation and the fact that he owed her money for the car payments and the co-signing of the car, that sort of thing. It got really heated. They got into a big argument, and Rick basically told him to leave and never return. So he leaves. Gail goes obviously to lie down, have a nap, go to sleep, whatever. And then Ryan comes back 20 minutes later saying, my car won't start, I need you to give me a jump. So Rick goes out to his car to get the stuff that he needs to be able to give Ryan a jump, and that is when Ryan comes out to him and he kind of like gestures for him to roll the window down so he can talk to him, and that is when he shoots Rick twice in the side of the head at point blank range and kills him. He then went into the house and went into the primary bedroom where Gail was sleeping, and he shot her in the face 3 times execution style, killing her too. He told Pam that he did this because, you know, Gail thought that she was too good for their family and too good to help their family. And Pam, just like in shock, told him to leave because she needed to process everything that she had just been told. He left. Later that afternoon though, he calls her up and he's like, look, can I please come and see you? And she reluctantly says yes. And he comes over to her house and he's like, look, can I drive you to my place? Can we go to my place? So she gets into his car with her 6-month-old son. And instead of driving them to his house, he actually drives them to Rick and Gail's house. And, you know, he grabs her, he forces her out of the car. He takes her over to Rick's car where Rick's body is, and he shows her the body. He's slumped inside. Pam is just in tears, and he grabs her wrist again and he forces her into the house to see Gail's body, and he tells her, you know, isn't she so beautiful? Doesn't she look so beautiful? Which is also insane when you think about the fact that she's been shot 3 times in the face by him. By this point, there's probably some discoloration going on in the face as well. And then he also tells her, if you tell anyone, I'll do this to you too. He then put her back in the car, drove her to his house, and his friend Jimbo came over for a coffee, which was like a regular occurrence. Jimbo would always come over to have a coffee with him, and Pam overheard him telling Jimbo how his sister and her husband had been killed, and this was a full like 24 hours before their bodies would be found and a full 30 hours before he would be informed of their deaths. After Jimbo left, Pam asked him to take her home so she could get ready for work, and before they left, he showed her the .22 caliber revolver that he had used in the murders, and he also showed her a bag full of the clothes that he had been wearing during the murders, and he put them in the back of his car so he could dispose of them after dropping Pam off. On the drive, he threatened her again, and he also concocted the alibi that he would then force her to use. For the next 25 years, she carried this with her. She went to the funeral, she grieved with the family, all while knowing what had happened to Gail and Rick and not being able to say anything out of fear for herself and her son. It's such an insane situation because this man admitted to killing 2 people, one of which was his sister. He forced her to go to the murder scene, showed her the bodies, and then she went on to marry him and have 3 more kids with him over the next, 25 years. And she was obviously very clearly another one of his victims. She must have been scared shitless of this guy. I mean, he was clearly very manipulative, very controlling. She also supported him, she worked full time. He didn't work at all. He was a stay-at-home dad, and she supported the entire family. But it's so hard to grapple with the fact that somebody knew the truth for 25 years and the family just, for those 25 years, got no closure. They had no idea what happened to their loved ones. She went on to marry this man who she knew was a killer, killed his sister, had 3 kids with him. She was with him for 25 years, all while knowing this. And she said, the longer it went on, the harder it was to say anything. She was scared for herself and for her kids. And he was obviously very clearly super controlling and super manipulative. He would call her daily at work to check in on what she was doing and what was going on. He wouldn't let her have any friends of her own. She said that her father was also abusive, and she believes that that's why Ryan was so easily able to manipulate and control her. I mean, even after her second interview with police where she rescinded the alibi and told them that the alibi was a lie, he went home and he yelled at her. He's like, I can't believe you did this. I can't believe you told them this. You threw me under the bus. You're such a traitor. And then he switched up and he's like, you know what? It wasn't your fault. They clearly bullied you. They threatened you. They coerced you into doing this. I should sue them. I should sue them for mistreating you and psychologically confusing my wife. And that's when he went on to leave all of those unhinged voice messages for Detective Barkley. And then during this interview, where she's giving the whole truth of everything that happened, he is incessantly calling and texting her. He called her over 100 times during this interview. And police were just like, this is crazy. We don't want to let Pam go back into that situation, especially after all of this information she's just given us. So we need to get him in custody now. We need to arrest him now. They also didn't want to give him the opportunity to go and dispose of any evidence or to flee or anything like that. So they went and they arrested him, they brought him in, interrogated him, and he denied everything, of course. He denied, he still went by his alibi, said that he had no involvement in the murders. The only thing he admitted to was that there was one instance of penetration between him and Gail, which he said was consensual, which obviously no one was buying. He molested his sister. There's no other way around it. No one believed otherwise. After his arrest, when he was being held in custody, he sent Pam 29 letters where he basically begged her to go back on her statement. He tried to convince her that the detectives had bullied her, threatened her, coerced her into making this statement. They had abused her. He accused her of lying. He threatened her for going against him. His trial began in March of 2014 and he was 51 years old by this point. The prosecution presented a case that argued that Ryan had murdered his sister and her husband out of fear that Gail would tell her husband about the incestuous abuse she suffered, that she thought she was too good for her family and too good to help them out, and that he was jealous of Gail and Rick's success and their middle-class lifestyle, whereas he was struggling financially. They had 60 witnesses during this trial that would testify against him, and the star witness, of course, being his wife, Pam. She testified to everything that she said in her interview, after which Ryan got up and started yelling at her that she was a black-hearted, evil woman, and that he couldn't believe that she was saying all of these lies about him. He literally had to be removed from the courtroom in his own trial. One of his fellow inmates, Daryl Kane, said that while he was in custody awaiting trial, that he admitted to him that he had committed the murders, and he was boasting about it. He also said of his sister Cheryl, who had been campaigning for the last 25 years to have her sister and Rick's case solved, he said, if I knew that bitch was going to cause me so much trouble, I would have killed her a long time ago. And then he mimed choking someone out with his hands. Ryan also testified on his own behalf, and he was super rambling and just kind of odd. The judge often had to remind him to stay on track because he would go off on these crazy tangents. But he said that he never molested Gail, that the few sexual encounters they had happened when they were very, very young and it was just innocent and exploratory. But he said that he never molested Gail, that there was only a few sort of encounters that could be perceived as sexual that happened when they were very, very young, and that they were only innocent and exploratory, and he only ever admitted to more under duress. He described 3 incidences that happened between him and Gail that could be considered sexual. The first occurred when Gail was 10 and he was 12, which kind of you'll find in these 3 examples that the ages really don't add up with real life. But he said Gail was 10, he was 12, they were naked in the shower and they were just kind of comparing body parts. Then when they were 11 and 13, he claims that he found a weed pipe in his dad's friend's car. He and Gail smoked some weed, got high, and then groped on each other a little bit. And then he said the 3rd incident was when Gail was 13 and he was 14, which, you know, the ages are just getting closer and closer together, and they don't really make sense anyway because he's 2.5 years older than her. So it's not possible that there was a time period when she was 13 and he was 14. But in this last incident, he says basically that they were high again and that Gail was the aggressor. She straddled him, and then nothing ended up happening because she heard their dad walking up. He also claimed that he wouldn't have cared if Gail told anybody else about these incidents, that he wouldn't have cared if she told Rick or anyone else. And so their motive of him killing her because he didn't want anyone to find out doesn't really make sense. He also stuck to his original alibi and said that Pam had been threatened and abused and coerced into lying and rescinding the alibi, and that she was willing to do it because she wanted a divorce. When he was cross-examined, he actually started crying and he was like saying, I can't understand why my wife Pam and my sister Cheryl are testifying against me. They must have been forced by the detectives. And he said that he deserves to sue the county over this. Also during the trial, the prosecution argued that the passenger window that had been smashed was smashed when Ryan had missed a shot and it got the window instead of Rick. And the defense had an expert called to the stand who tried to claim that actually it had been smashed from the outside by a crowbar. The defense also testified that, there were 6 fingerprints, 4 of which belonged to the victims, 2 of which were not a match to anyone in the databases. And the defense also argued that these 2 fingerprints were not a match for Ryan either. The defense also tried to, bring up some other theories. And one of these theories was to do with Gail's work. Maybe somebody at Gail's work had something to do with the murder. Basically, they tried to say that she was looking into financial irregularities at her company, Donnelly Corp, because apparently there was like a document from the company which had been at the murder scene, but then it was like removed from the murder scene before it could be investigated. A Donnelly Corp official said that he had gone to the crime scene and there was no document there. He didn't ask for any documents. That just, it wasn't a thing, basically. The prosecution even argued that the financial irregularity theory was little green men from Mars stuff. The defense also tried to bring the motorcycle gang theory back into it, which the prosecution said that they were just doing this to try and throw the jury off with sensational information that this had already been discredited. And in the end, on the 28th of March in 2014, Ryan Weingarten was found guilty of both Gail and Rick's murders. His sentencing took place in April, and during his sentencing hearing, he ranted for an hour about how unfair his conviction was. He got teary. He said, I'm a good man. Why has this happened? Rick's brother also spoke at the sentencing hearing, and he said, Father North began the funeral like I've never heard a funeral started before and will never again. He said, and I quote, this is not the work of the Lord, this is the work of the devil. He went on to say, to that end, Ryan will be judged divinely. The holidays, the special times we used to only share with family, have been wiped away by Ryan, his anger, and his jealousy. The judge ended up sentencing Ryan to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And as he was reading his sentencing, Ryan continuously interrupted him, and he told the judge that the detectives had, quote, mentally raped my wife and put her in a position to make her feel like she had to choose between telling a lie against me or going to prison. And the judge ended up having to say to him, quote, do I need to bind you and gag you, sir? We'll have the deputies go and duct tape you if that's what's necessary, but you're going to listen. Ryan appealed his conviction 3 times, including with the Supreme Court, and all of his appeals were denied, so he remains incarcerated. After his conviction, his sister Cheryl said, quote, "We're done. We finally got him. He created the situation and now he has to pay for it." Rick's brother said, quote, "We are extremely pleased to have the justice my brother deserves. At least this gives us some closure in how it happened and why it happened." The only person that was unhappy with the conviction was Ryan's mother, Dorothea. She did not believe that her son was guilty. She even told one officer, "I don't care, you're wrong." But that's everything. That's all from me today. That's all for this case. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one because it is truly insane. The fact that it took 25 years to solve this case and somebody knew that whole time. Like, there were people that knew that entire time what had happened, and the family just like started to give up hope basically on ever finding out what had happened to their loved ones. He is clearly deranged, like a deranged human being, and I can't even imagine what it would be like for his wife to have been with him for all of that time and have 3 kids with him. Although in court she did say that she still loved him, but he's also very controlling, very manipulative, so he had her feeling some kind of way, but it's just so insane. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts, but that's all from me today, guys. Again, make sure you check out the description box so you can download and play Merge Dragons for free, or you can scan the QR code to download it. But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you have a great weekend, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.